The Galaxy S23 Plus and the iPhone 14 Pro are priced at $999, and there is one question. Which should you buy and why? Now, I'll be answering that question in this video because I have been using both these phones for the last week and I'm not really sure which phone I really want to use going forward after the whole review phase thing is done. There are some things that the S23 gives me that the iPhone just does not, and vice versa. So let's see which is the better phone and the better value for money. Exciting, isn't it? Let's go. Now let's start this off with the price. Pricing is very difficult when you want to get a phone. You can evaluate all the specs and features, but once the price of that device is not in the best interest, then most people just look for an alternative. Now the Pro versions of the iPhones have always been $999 for as long as I can remember, and most times it's met with positive reception because with Apple you kind of know what you're getting. And it's pretty similar to Samsung. The S23 Plus is $999, but this year there's been a shift. Now, depending on who you're talking to, some people think the S23 Plus should have been $799 instead, since it's not a big upgrade from the S22 Plus. Now, while I do agree with that sentiment, the prices of the Samsung phones mostly reduce after a couple of months of release with third-party retailers like Best Buy and Amazon. So if the current price of the S23 Plus is above your budget, then that is something to think about. But either way, comment below if you think the S23 Plus should have been $799 instead. Now, the body and display of both these phones are very similar. They both have a square design with a matte finish that is very smooth. A slight difference here is that the S23 Plus has an aluminum rail, while the 14 Pro has a stainless steel frame, which gives it its very boxy frame. Now, holding these phones without a case is an extreme sport. However, the iPhone 14 Pro offers a better grip but will give you hand fatigue due to its weight that's about 206 grams to the S23 Plus's 196 grams. Both are scratch resistant and can withstand a drop on any hard floor, but I keep a case on mine just to be on the safe side. Now, where the S23 Plus shines the most is the back of the phone. Now, even though lavender is the best color in the world in my opinion, green is a standout color over the iPhone 14 Pro's deep purple. On the back, they both have a triple camera setup, but more on that in a bit. On the sides, the S23 Plus has the power button and the volume button on the side, while the iPhone 14 Pro has the power button on the right side and the volume keys on the left side. Personally, I prefer everything to be on one side of the phone, whether it be on the left or on the right. So the S23 Plus is better suited for me. At the bottom, the S23 Plus has a USB-C port, which makes a lot of sense to me because everything in the world is USB-C nowadays. But the iPhone 14 Pro still has the lightning cable. But with the new law that just passed, the iPhone 15 might just have a USB-C cable, or if we know Apple, they'll rather give us a portless iPhone instead, just to take the piss. It wouldn't surprise me at all. Now, speakers on both these phones are pretty loud and good enough to listen to your music, radio, or even podcasts. When it comes to its display, Samsung has been the king of this department for many years, but things are changing. The iPhone 14 Pro is a Super Retina OLED panel with HDR10 and a 120Hz refresh rate. Now, because the panel is an LTPO panel, it can go as low as 1 Hz when you're not scrolling through, and that saves battery in the long term. The 6.1-inch display makes it easier to reach all 4 corners of the phone without any issues. The S23 Plus, on the other hand, is the same as last year's S22 Plus. It is 6.6 inches, has a dynamic AMOLED 2X with a 120Hz refresh rate that goes only as low as 48Hz. It also has HDR10. Now, the difference between the S22 Plus and the S23 Plus is it now has Gorilla Glass Victus 2 for protection. Now, when it comes to the brightness, both are bright, but the iPhone 14 produces more with 2000 nits of peak brightness to the S23 Plus's 1750 nits. Now, when outside in daytime, both phones are visible, but in extreme conditions, the 2000 nits from the iPhone 14 Pro makes a huge difference. Battery life is where I am somewhat divided. If you asked me about a month or two ago about the best phone with the best battery life in the world, I would easily say the iPhone 14 Pro and the iPhone 14 Pro Max. But since iOS 16.3, it's been really average, or some days it's absolutely abysmal. iOS 16.3 hasn't exactly been the smoothest OS update, but that's another topic for another video. The iPhone 14 Pro has a 3200 mAh of battery, while the S23 Plus now has a 47 mAh, a bump from last year's phone. On paper, there really shouldn't be any competition, but with how iOS 16.3 is and a bump up in its battery on the S23 Plus, it's safe to say the Galaxy S23 Plus has the better battery this year. It's a day and a half or a 2-day phone depending on your usage. Now I'm going to revisit this if the new iOS update fixes the battery life. A few other things that make these phones quite the same but different is how you unlock the phone. The iPhone primarily uses Face ID, and this is very fast and is a staple with Apple, whereas the S23 Plus uses different methods, but the most popular is the fingerprint scanner, which is ultrasonic. It is fast, reliable, and a better way to secure your phone than the iPhone 14 Pro. Alright, let's move on to the software and the performance. The iPhone 14 Pro has the A16 Bionic chip, while the S23 Plus has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chip for Galaxy, which is a custom chip. Now this is great because in the past we've gotten Exynos in Europe, while Snapdragon was in North America, which was pretty hard to pinpoint the actual performance of the Samsung devices. Performance has been great on these phones, and there aren't really any issues that I can think of at the top of my head. Both can also handle gaming like first-person shooters to the highest frame rate. Myself and One UI are in a love-hate relationship. It still isn't my favorite skin on Android, but it has made improvements over the last couple of years, and so far I think and I can say Samsung has given me the most consistent version of Android. One of the best things about One UI is the ability to be very customizable. I have a lock screen widget to see if I have any schedules or alarms, and I can design it to whatever I prefer. If you're also into applying themes and not installing Nova Launcher, Samsung has different themes that you can choose from, especially when changing icons if the stock icons are not really your taste. Now when it comes to my home screen, I'm a very simple person. I just prefer a colorful wallpaper with 3 to 4 essential icons, a couple widgets, and I color code my apps for easier access. The A16 Bionic chip this year has improved with the performance of the dynamic island. Here are a few examples of what you can do with it. Now when you're listening to music, you can adjust the controls of the music by pressing and holding it. You can also get into the current app in the background by tapping it. One of the things I love is how it slides back into the bar when you exit the app so smoothly. For calls and timers, you can access them here as well. Now with timers, you can see the countdown without having to go into the app. Now a lot more apps need to be optimized for this, but so far it hasn't really happened. But I predict that maybe sometime this year, a lot of apps are going to start improving and optimizing for the iPhone 14 Pro and the Pro Max. Now I don't really have anything bad to say about it. Well, maybe it's just intrusive when you're watching videos than the notch, but I see my eyes adjusting to it as time passes by. This is just basically iOS versus Android, and your choice depends on your preference and what ecosystem you're currently in. Both the S23 Plus and the iPhone 14 Pro have a triple camera system, but they differ in terms of specs. The S23 Plus has a 50 megapixel main wide-angle lens, a 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and a 12 megapixel ultra-wide lens, while the iPhone 14 Pro has a 48 megapixel on its main sensor and a 12 megapixel on the telephoto and the ultra-wide. Now the difference is not so clear between these two phones, and I realized it's very subjective. Megapixels don't really tell the full story because the iPhone 14 Pro is still the better camera unit than the S23 Plus, especially when it comes to its video. Now don't come from my head yet, just keep watching the video. From a user perspective, you will get great shots with both these phones. When I tested them out, both gave me good color accuracy and vibrancy in good lighting conditions, and that also goes for the portrait mode and the ultra wide. Although the ultra wide on the S23 Plus gave me more a softer tone. Where the S23 Plus shines the most is with its telephoto lens and that 30x zoom, whereas the iPhone 14 Pro only gets as far as 15x. But I wouldn't really worry about it too much, as this feature isn't going to be used on a daily basis. Now what the iPhone does better is video recording. Now even though the S23 Plus shoots in 8K, the quality of the video camera on the iPhone 14 Pro is still unmatched, and is hands down the king of video recording, even though the S23 Plus is not so far behind. So if you want to start out as a content creator and you're on a budget and you don't want to buy a camera and lenses, you should really consider the iPhone 14 Pro. Now when it comes to which phone offers the better value for money, it is the iPhone 14 Pro, and here's why. I think Samsung should have priced the S23 at $599 and the Plus at $799, because the S23 Plus at $999 does not really favor the phone at all, because the S23 Ultra is just $200 more. It honestly feels like Samsung just sent out the S23 Plus to die. Thank you guys for watching this video, and if you liked it, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. If you want to see me compare the Pixel 7 to the S23, click right here, and if you want to see the insane features that the Pixel 7 can do, click right here. I'll catch you guys in the next one where I talk all things tech.